Welcome to Reform Thinking. Today is Wednesday, 2026-0603. And, usually when we think about making a massive societal shift, we picture massive, highly visible infrastructure.
Right, yeah, like armies moving across borders.
So our big legislatures writing sweeping laws, or just billions of dollars changing hands to build something entirely new, right from the ground up.
We want to see the blueprint. We want to see the concrete being poured.
Yeah, and we want to point to the physical result. We like our action to be visible. We want it categorized. We want it measured.
But then you step into the framework of 18th century spiritual thought, and the mechanism for moving the entire world is quite different.
It really is. It looks like, well, people talking quietly in rooms. At first glance, it seems totally disproportionate to the goal.
It is the absolute definition of a disproportionate response. You are looking at a goal that is cosmic in scale.
Right. The total renewal of society.
Yeah, and the advancement of a global kingdom. And the proposed method to achieve it looks like a few people sitting in a parlor, bowing their heads in agreement.
It feels like trying to empty the ocean with a teacup.
It really does.
Okay, so let's get into it. Welcome to our deep dive for today. We are going to look very closely at that seemingly disproportionate response.
Our singular source for this analysis is a specific section from the writings of Jonathan Edwards.
Yeah, the piece is called Extraordinary Prayer for the Revival of Religion and the Advancement of Christ's Kingdom on Earth.
And we are zeroing in on his arguments regarding the beauty and the good tendency of Christian union.
Right, so Edwards is writing this with a very clear, very specific goal in mind. He is trying to persuade believers that they need to coordinate.
He is looking at a fractured, distracted religious landscape and arguing that solitary religion is insufficient for the crisis at hand.
Which brings us to the mission for this deep dive. We want to unpack why explicitly agreeing to pray together is not just a nice idea.
Or a sweet sentiment to put on a greeting card.
Yeah, no, it is an essential, highly effective duty for Christians who are seeking revival. He argues that it is a rigorous requirement. Okay, let's unpack this.
Edwards begins his argument with a concept that might seem a bit unusual to modern ears when discussing duty or strategy. He starts with aesthetics.
Aesthetics, like how things look.
Yeah. He asks a rhetorical question, essentially saying, how decent, how beautiful, and of good tendency would it be for multitudes of Christians, by explicit agreement, to unite in prayer?
So, wait, condescent. That is a word you do not hear every day.
No, you really don't.
I mean, it means fitting, right?
Or appropriate. Yeah, suitable. He is saying that when Christians explicitly agree to pray together, it simply fits the way the universe is supposed to work. It is aesthetically pleasing to God.
He calls union one of the most amiable things that pertains to human society.
He does.
But I want to pause on that for a second. Why aesthetics? Usually when we talk about strategic action, we talk about efficiency or metrics.
Right.
We do not usually say, let's form a committee because it will look beautiful. Why is he leaning so hard into the idea of beauty?
Because for Edwards, beauty is not just a surface-level decoration. In his theological framework, true beauty is the alignment of a thing with its intended design.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, when something functions precisely as the Creator meant for it to function, it generates a moral and spiritual beauty.
That makes a lot of sense.
And what is fascinating here is how he grounds this idea of union. He does not start with the church. He starts with humanity as a whole.
Right. He points out that God has made all nations of men of one blood to dwell on all the face of the earth.
He is pulling that phrase straight from the book of Acts.
Right.
And he draws a specific moral lesson from this biological and historical reality. Because we are of one blood, mankind should act as one family.
It is a massive statement of human solidarity. We're all fundamentally connected. We share the same origins. We share the same nature.
And Edwards says God has disposed men to society. We are wired for it.
Right. He placed us in circumstances that oblige us and necessitate us to work together. We need each other to survive, to build, to thrive.
We are not solitary predators. We are a communal species.
Yeah. And he builds a ladder of logic here. He acknowledges that human beings naturally form societies to manage their earthly lives. He calls this a civil union.
Yes.
Let me offer an analogy to help clarify that for you listening. Think of a civil union like a highly successful corporation, or maybe a really well-run city.
Yeah.
A city where the trash is picked up on time, the trains run on schedule, the laws are just, and the citizens generally cooperate to keep the economy functioning.
That harmonious agreement in managing secular concerns is, as Edwards says, amiable. It is pleasant to witness.
Everyone appreciates a functional society where people aren't constantly at each other's throats.
Absolutely.
But then he pivots. He
Hey.
elevates something else far above that functional society.
Yeah.
He introduces the concept of a pious union.
Hmm.
He says a pious union is much more amiable.
He does.
So I have to ask, what makes a pious union so distinct from a well-functioning corporation or a highly efficient city? If they both require cooperation and yield good results, why the drastic distinction in value?
The distinction lies entirely in the objective and the animating force. A civil union exists to manage secular concerns, the physical, temporary aspects of human existence.
Right, it is about logistics.
Yeah, it is about making sure we do not starve and that our property is secure. But Edwards argues that the great business for which man was created is actually religion.
And then he gives us this striking phrase. He says the life and soul of that religion is love.
That is the turning point of his whole first argument. The life and soul of it is love.
A corporation functions smoothly because of mutual self-interest or a desire for profit. The CEO and the mailroom clerk do not necessarily love each other.
Right, they just both want the company to succeed so they can get paid.
A city functions well because people want safety and clean streets.
But a pious union, a gathering of believers explicitly agreeing to seek the advancement of Christ's kingdom, functions because of a shared vertical love for God.
And that vertical love spills over into a horizontal love for each other.
Yes, exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Edwards is saying that when human beings unite in love for the great business of religion, they are fulfilling their highest possible design,
They are operating precisely as the Creator intended.
hitting the absolute peak of that condescent beauty we talked about. And the result of that, he says, is that it makes earth most like heaven.
Earth most like heaven.
Heaven is the ultimate pious union where every will is perfectly aligned with God's will.
And every individual is bound to every other individual by pure affection.
Right, so when Christians on earth explicitly agree to unite their voices and their hearts for a single spiritual purpose, they are creating a localized replica of heavenly reality.
They are pulling a piece of heaven down into the present moment. That is a staggering thought.
It really is.
Okay, but creating a replica of heavenly reality sounds beautiful in a philosophical sense. But aesthetics alone do not win battles.
No, they don't.
They do not sustain a movement. Does Edwards ground this in any sort of hard structural theology, or is it just poetry?
Oh, he certainly grounds it. He does not rely on abstract philosophy for very long. He moves straight into the scriptural architecture of this oneness.
So he pulls from the text.
He pulls from multiple parts of the biblical text to prove that union is the peculiar characteristic of the church. He starts with a rather poetic reference from the Old Testament.
From the Song of Solomon, right? Or Canticles, chapter 6, verse 9.
That's right.
Let me quote it. My dove, my undefiled, is but one. She is the only one of her mother. She is the choice one of her that bare her. The daughters saw her and blessed her, yea, the queens and the concubines, and they praised her.
It is intensely poetic language.
It is. In the context of the Song of Solomon, it describes the singular, pure, undivided affection between the bridegroom and the bride.
And within our theological framework, this is classically understood as a picture of the relationship between Christ and his church.
The church is the dove.
The church is the undefiled. And the primary characteristic highlighted here is exclusivity and singularity. She is but one.
Christ does not have multiple brides. He has one unified body.
Exactly.
And then Edwards moves from the poetry of the bride to the geography of the nation. He quotes Psalm 122, verse 5.
Jerusalem is builded as a city that is compact together.
Now, wait. I want to push back on the compact city idea for a second.
Okay, go ahead.
If a city is densely packed, it also means disease spreads faster.
Sure, yeah.
If a fire breaks out, the whole place burns down. If an enemy breaches one section of the wall, the entire population is instantly doomed.
That's true.
When I think of safety today, I think of having the space, some distance. Why is Edwards framing density and compactness as purely a strength?
That is a very fair critique from a modern perspective, but you have to look at the mechanics of ancient survival.
Okay.
A compact city in the ancient Near East was a secure city precisely because it forced a shared reality. Yes, a breached wall was catastrophic, but that is the point.
A shared reality.
Right. A compact city shares a single defensive wall, which means every citizen is equally invested in the integrity of that wall.
Oh, I see. You do not ignore a crumbling brick if it means your own house is exposed.
Exactly. Furthermore, they share resources like a common water supply. But even more significantly for the psalmist, a compact city gathers for unified worship.
The tribes of Israel would go up to Jerusalem, to the temple, to worship together in one concentrated location.
So the compactness eliminates the illusion of independence.
Yeah, if you live scattered out in the countryside, you might convince yourself that you do not need your neighbor.
Right, but when you are inside the walls of Jerusalem, your fate is entirely tied to the fate of the person next door. The physical density forced a practical unity, which reflected their spiritual reality.
That makes perfect sense.
And then Edwards takes us into the New Testament to show the internal mechanics of this oneness. He's no longer looking at city walls.
Right, he is looking at the spiritual fabric of the Christian faith.
He goes to Ephesians chapter 4, verses 3 through 6. This is perhaps the most forceful statement of unity in the entire biblical canon.
Paul urges the Ephesians to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace.
And then he unleashes this rapid-fire list of singular realities.
There is one body and one Spirit, even as ye are called in one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in you all.
The repetition is just hammering the point home. One, one, one. It leaves absolutely zero room for division.
If you have the same Spirit, the same Lord, the same faith, the same baptism, and the same God and Father, how could you possibly operate as fragmented, isolated individuals?
The theological math just does not allow for it. It would be a contradiction in terms.
Or, to put it another way, the spiritual reality demands a corresponding practical reality.
Right. You cannot have all those underlying ones and then live as a fractured, disconnected multitude.
It would be like claiming you are a part of a massive orchestra, but refusing to play the same sheet music as the rest of the musicians.
That's a great way to put it. The underlying reality of the music demands that you synchronize.
Edwards continues in Ephesians 4, dropping down to verse 16. And this is where the imagery shifts from a city to a living organism.
Yeah, the human body.
The whole body, fitly framed together and compacted by that which every joint supplieth, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part, maketh increase of the body unto the edifying itself in love.
Think about human anatomy.
Yeah, if you have a dislocated shoulder or a knee joint that is out of alignment, the whole body suffers.
The body cannot run, it cannot lift, it cannot function properly.
You do not just ignore a dislocated joint. The pain demands that you snap it back into union with the rest of the skeletal structure.
And it certainly cannot grow while in that state. The text says the body maketh increase only when it is fitly framed together and compacted.
Every single joint has to supply something. The parts are interdependent.
If one part decides to act independently, the entire organism enters a state of dysfunction.
So when a Christian tries to operate independently without explicit agreement and union with other Christians, they're essentially a dislocated joint.
Yeah, they might still technically be part of the body, but they are not supplying what they are supposed to supply.
And they are actively hindering the growth of the whole organism. The entire mechanism of growth relies on unison and love.
This raises a very logical question.
Okay, what is it?
If the church is one body, one family, one compact city, internally and spiritually, what does that require of us externally?
Right.
Edwards moves the conversation from the internal, invisible reality of unity to a strict demand for external, visible, coordinated action.
He says, as it is the glory of the Church of Christ, that in all her members, however dispersed, she is thus one holy society, one city, one family, one body.
So it is very desirable that this union should be manifested and become visible.
He wants the distant members to act as one in things that concern the common interests of the whole body.
And he uses a very specific logical structure to prove this. It's known as an a fortiori argument.
That is a Latin phrase, right? Meaning from the stronger.
Correct. It argues from a lesser case to a greater case. If something is true in a lesser situation, it must be even more true in a greater situation.
Let us break down how Edwards applies that logic. He starts with a lesser case, a standard human family.
He notes that it is completely appropriate and expected for members of a particular family who have a common interest to visibly unite in prayer to God for the things they need.
If a family is facing a medical crisis or needs financial provision, they gather in the living room, explicitly agree on what they're asking for, and pray together.
Right. It is an instinctual response to shared need. Nobody questions that.
Then he scales it up to a physical nation. He says it is fitting for a nation at certain seasons to visibly unite in prayer for public mercies that concern the interest of the whole nation.
Think about it. If there's a massive drought threatening the crops or a foreign army threatening the borders, the leaders might call for a national day of fasting and prayer.
The citizens explicitly agreed to pray for the nation's survival.
Now comes a greater case. If a standard family does this and a physical nation does this, then what about the church?
Right.
Edwards defines the church as one holy nation, a peculiar people, one heavenly family.
The church is more strictly united than any biological family or political nation.
Yes. Those earthly ties will eventually dissolve, but the spiritual ties of the church are eternal.
Therefore, the church has a far greater obligation to visibly unite and expressly agree together in prayer for its common prosperity.
He even says the church has infinitely greater interests that are common to the whole than any other society.
Let us talk about those interests. A regular nation prays for temporary things.
Yeah, they pray for peace treaties to hold.
They pray for the stock market to stabilize.
They pray for rain so the agricultural sector does not collapse.
Those are all good things, but they're entirely temporary. Why are the church's interests infinitely greater?
Because the church's interests deal with eternal realities and the fundamental restoration of the cosmos.
The church is praying for the spread of the gospel, the salvation of immortal souls.
The revival of dead hearts, and the ultimate glory of God in the earth.
Edwards specifically points to the common prosperity and advancement, so unspeakably great and glorious, which God had so abundantly promised to fulfill in the latter days.
The church is praying for the culmination of human history.
You simply cannot compare the significance of an economic upturn in one country to the global advancement of Christ's kingdom.
One is a footnote in a history book. The other is the entire point of the story.
And because those stakes are so high, Edwards has some very strong words for those who ignore this duty.
Very strong words.
He takes aim at what he calls a narrow, selfish spirit. He says that kind of spirit, above all others, disagrees with the character of a Christian.
It really makes me think of modern prayer chains.
Right. If you look at how we often pray today, 90% of the time it is hyper-localized.
It is pray for my upcoming job interview, or pray for my aunt's hip surgery.
Or pray for my kid's math test. It is intensely insular. So let me ask you this. Is Edwards saying that praying for our individual daily needs is wrong? Are we supposed to abandon praying for the aunt's hip entirely?
No, individual requests are entirely valid. Christ himself taught his followers to pray, "Give us this day our daily bread."
Okay, so what is the problem?
The problem arises when your prayers stop there. The issue is exclusivity and proportion.
Ah, proportion.
Yeah. If your prayer life is entirely consumed by your own personal needs, your own comfort, and your own immediate circle, you are acting as if you're not part of a global body.
You're acting like a severed finger instead of a connected limb.
Exactly. True Reformed theology always looks outward. It recognizes God's cosmic redemptive plan.
If you never lift your eyes from your own plate to look at the starvation of the world around you, your spirit is painfully narrow.
It is about proportion. If you are part of a heavenly family with infinitely greater interests, your prayers should reflect that massive scope.
You should be agonizing over the welfare and happiness of the whole body of Christ, not just the borders of your own property.
And union in prayer is especially fitting when you are asking for mercy that will bring relief, prosperity, and glory to the entire body.
Which brings us to a fascinating psychological and spiritual dynamic.
Yes, this is a huge point.
Edwards argues that this kind of united prayer is not just an external duty. It is incredibly beneficial to the internal workings of the people doing the praying.
Right.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Edwards says this union in prayer would not only be beautiful, but profitable too. It creates a massive feedback loop in the hearts of believers.
It does.
How does explicitly agreeing to pray for someone else actually benefit the person saying the prayer?
He states that united prayer tends to promote charity between distant members and a public spirit.
Think about how this works practically.
Yeah, when you intentionally set aside time to pray for believers in another country, people you have never met, whose language you do not speak,
Whose specific daily struggles you cannot even picture.
your affection for them naturally grows. You cannot earnestly intercede for someone's spiritual welfare day after day without developing a deep-seated love for them.
You are investing your soul into their success. And that builds a public spirit, a genuine concern for the interest of Zion as a whole.
But there is another layer to this. He talks about particular agreement and joint resolution.
This is not just vaguely saying, Lord, bless the world before you go to sleep.
No, this is setting a specific time with specific people to ask for a specific revival. Edwards says this makes people highly inquisitive and attentive.
It awakens their attention. When you have a joint resolution to pray for a specific outcome, you start looking for it.
You scan the horizon for the answer.
It's like when you decide you're going to buy a blue Honda Civic.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Before you made that decision, you never noticed them.
Yeah.
They were just background noise.
Right.
But the moment you commit to that specific car, they are suddenly at every stoplight, in every grocery store parking lot, parked on your street.
The cars were always there, but your brain was not tuned to see them. Your resolution changed your perception.
That is precisely what Edwards is describing. When a group of Christians explicitly agrees to pray for the revival of religion, their spiritual radar is tuned to look for signs of God's work.
They become more inquisitive about it.
If they hear a report of a church growing in another town or a sudden hunger for the scriptures in a distant nation, they notice it immediately.
They do not just scroll past the news. They stop and analyze it because it is exactly what they have been asking for.
And because they notice it, they are, as Edwards says, more ready to rejoice and praise God when they see or hear of anything of that nature or tendency.
The prayer sets up the anticipation, and the anticipation results in immediate praise when the answer begins to appear.
And this forward-looking anticipation also causes a profound inward reflection. This is what we can call the mirror effect.
The mirror effect, right. Edwards writes that being engaged in extraordinary prayer for the flourishing of religion will naturally lead each one to reflect on himself.
And consider how religion flourishes in his own heart, and how far his example contributes to that for which he is praying.
You cannot hypocritically pray for the world to become holy while ignoring the blatant sin in your own living room.
The sheer act of asking God to purify the global church forces you to ask, is my own heart pure?
Is my own household reflecting this reality?
Am I asking God to do something out there that I am actively resisting in here?
You become acutely aware of the gap between your public requests and your private reality.
It acts as a purifying fire for the individual believer. It strips away hypocrisy.
And Edwards makes a point to single out one specific group of people who benefit immensely from this: the ministers.
He says it tends to engage ministers to greater diligence and earnestness in their work.
Which is incredibly logical, because he says the very business of their lives should be seeking the welfare of the church and the advancement of Christ's kingdom.
If a minister is leading his congregation in this explicit agreement, and he is watching them become awakened and attentive and self-reflective,
it is going to put a massive fire in his belly when he steps into the pulpit.
he will preach with a totally different level of earnestness because he knows the congregation is actively crying out to God for the very things he is preaching about.
The joint prayer fuels the ministry. The pulpit and the pew enter a symbiotic relationship of spiritual intensity.
Edwards has laid out the logical arguments, the scriptural commands, and the practical benefits. But he knows that sometimes people need to see a concept in action to truly grasp its weight.
So he pulls two dramatic, high-stakes narratives from the Old Testament to prove that this works.
Yes, these are not hypothetical scenarios. These are historical case studies of extreme crisis.
And the first one takes us to the Babylonian Empire with the prophet Daniel.
Now assume you know the Sunday school version of this. The king, Nebuchadnezzar, has a terrifying dream.
He demands that his wise men, astrologers, and magicians not only interpret the dream, but tell him what the dream actually was.
Which is impossible. If they fail, they die. Daniel is swept up in this death sentence. We all know the plot.
But Edwards isn't giving us a lesson on bravery here. He is looking at the tactical execution. What is the actual mechanism Daniel uses?
The mechanism is a joint resolution. Daniel does not act alone.
He buys time from the executioner, and then he goes straight to his house and makes the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his three companions.
The text is very clear on their objective. They explicitly agree together that they will unitedly desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning this secret.
They form a pious union in the middle of Babylon. They do not scatter to their separate rooms to pray solitary prayers. They coordinate.
And the result of that explicit agreement is absolute vindication. The secret is miraculously revealed to Daniel in a night vision.
But look at the fallout of that answered prayer. It is not just that their physical lives are saved. God puts immense honor upon them.
The great and haughty monarch, Nebuchadnezzar, literally falls on his face and worships Daniel's God.
He confesses that the God of Israel is a God of gods, and Daniel and his praying companions are promoted to high positions in the province.
It is a stunning display of leverage. 4 young men agree to pray, and the most powerful monarch on the planet is brought to his knees, confessing the truth of God.
That is the sheer effectiveness of a coordinated spiritual strategy. The explicit agreement acted as a lever that moved an empire.
But Edwards does not stop there. He brings up a second case study where the stakes are even higher. He talks about Esther in the Empire of Persia.
With Daniel, it was the lives of the royal wise men on the line. With Esther, it is the total annihilation of the entire Jewish nation dispersed throughout the Persian Empire.
Haman has manipulated the king into signing an irrevocable decree to slaughter every single Jew. They are on the absolute brink of total ruin.
Esther is in the palace, and she has to approach the king to beg for her people. But approaching the king uninvited carries an automatic death sentence unless he extends his scepter.
She needs a miracle. Again, what is the mechanism she relies on?
She relies on communal risk and communal intercession. She does not rely on her own solitary piety, even though she is the queen.
She sends word to Mordecai to gather all the Jews present in the city of Shushan.
Her instruction is to explicitly unite in fasting and prayer with her and her maidens for 3 days and nights.
She calls for a massive, coordinated, visible agreement in prayer. She leverages the entire Jewish population of the capital city.
And the outcome is one of the most stunning reversals in historical record. The intended destruction is completely inverted.
The enemies of the Jews are destroyed everywhere. The Jewish people are defended, they are honored, and they are promoted.
Their sorrow and extreme distress are turned into great gladness, feasting, triumph, and mutual joyful congratulations.
Edwards is pointing at these historical events and saying, look at the record. United prayer is not just a theoretical concept.
It is a highly effective, coordinated spiritual strategy in times of severe crisis.
When the people of God explicitly agree to ask for mercy, the very fabric of empires can be altered.
The mechanism of agreement produces results that solitary actions simply cannot match.
But looking at this objectively, Esther and Daniel were operating centuries before Christ.
True.
They were operating in a specific covenantal context of national Israel in exile. Is there a New Testament mechanism that actually guarantees this works? Or are we just relying on ancient Jewish history and hoping the same rules apply to us?
That is the exact friction Edwards anticipates. He knows he cannot just rely on Old Testament narrative.
He has to provide a New Testament guarantee that underpins everything we have discussed.
And he does exactly that. He quotes the very words of Jesus from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18, verse 92.
I say unto you, that if any 2 of you shall agree on earth, touching anything that they shall ask, it shall be done for them of my Father which is in heaven.
So what does this all mean? Why is agreement the specific condition that Christ highlights here?
He doesn't say if you pray really hard or if you pray for a long time. He specifies agreement.
Christ highlights agreement because agreement reflects the very nature of what he came to accomplish.
Edwards connects this promise in Matthew directly to Christ's high priestly prayer in John chapter 17.
In that prayer, given just hours before his crucifixion, Jesus prays repeatedly for his followers, asking the Father that they may be one, even as we are one.
He is praying with his dying breath for holy union.
Precisely. A holy union and communion of his people is the very thing Christ desires and delights in. It is what he came into the world to bring to pass.
God the Father honors unified prayer because unified prayer perfectly aligns with the deepest will of God the Son.
When 2 believers explicitly agree on earth to ask for the advancement of the kingdom, they are displaying the exact unity that Christ purchased with his blood.
They are proving that his sacrifice was effective in tearing down the dividing walls of hostility.
That brings us to the final text Edwards cites, which is the absolute climax of redemption. He goes to Ephesians chapter 1.
That in the dispensation of the fullness of times, he might gather together in one all things in Christ, both which are in heaven and which are on earth, even in him.
This is the grand cosmic conclusion. The chief end of the whole affair of our redemption is to gather everything together in one.
Sin scatters, sin divides, sin isolates people into their own selfish spheres, but redemption gathers. Redemption unites.
Let me synthesize this thought for you, the listener, because this is the core of Edwards' entire plea.
When you explicitly agree with another believer To pray for the advancement of Christ's kingdom, you are not just performing a religious chore.
You are actively participating in the exact purpose for which Christ died.
You are demonstrating the gathering together of all things in Christ. You are practically acting out the gospel.
To briefly recap the logical progression we have analyzed today, united prayer is aesthetically beautiful because it reflects human solidarity.
It is modeled by the scriptural architecture of the compact city and the unified body.
It is logically necessary because the visible church has infinitely greater interests than any earthly nation.
It is practically profitable because it tunes our attention and purifies our own hearts through the mirror effect.
It is proven by the historical triumphs of Daniel and Esther.
And it is guaranteed by the very nature of Christ's redemptive work, which seeks to make all things one.
And that brings the challenge directly to your doorstep. We have to evaluate our own habits in light of this intense logic.
Are you stuck in that narrow, selfish spirit that Edwards warned about?
Are your prayers entirely consumed by your own property lines, your own bank account, your own immediate comfort, and your own medical updates?
Or are you actively seeking explicit agreements with other believers for the common prosperity of the church?
Are you reaching out to say, let us at a time, let us form a joint resolution, and let us ask God to advance his kingdom?
The tools we have at our disposal make this challenge even more pressing. The logistical barriers that existed in the past are completely gone.
Exactly.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Jonathan Edwards wrote this plea in the 18th century.
When he wanted to build explicit agreement among distant Christians, he had to rely on paper letters carried by wooden ships across the Atlantic Ocean.
It took months to get a message from New England to Scotland. He was trying to build a global network of coordinated prayer at the literal speed of the wind.
Today, we hold devices in our pockets that can instantly connect us to believers in any nation on earth.
We have high-definition video, instant messaging, global telecommunications.
If Edwards saw the potential for a global, unified chorus of prayer back then, relying on ink and canvas, what is our excuse for remaining silent and divided now?
Are we using our incredible connectivity just for civil union, for business deals, political arguments, and social chatter?
Or are we leveraging it for a world-altering pious union?
That mechanism for moving the entire world is still just people talking quietly in rooms. But now, those rooms can be connected across the globe in a millisecond. The only question is whether we will actually agree to speak